the patron saint of our city, and St. Louis, Missouri, and Louisville, Kentucky. I gotta go and speak up.
Got that one.
She's filming us, filming her.
Right up there.
Dropped off here in New Orleans. Didn't know anything, know any better. Thank you, Europe. Think about it.
So in front of me in the fork of the road, there's a statue. It's the founder of the city, Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne, Sieur de Bienville, who founded the city in 1718. 2018 was the tricentennial year, and on the left side of them, you're going to see they have a Native American chieftain sitting down, and that's because we had a lot of Choctaw and Cherokee settlements here when we settled along the river. And behind him is a Capuchin monk, because he'd asked him to come teach the young boys in the colony, and then he got mad at them, and he kicked them out again. So they are back to back over here, and we're going to make a right. This is St. Louis Street. It has a lot of our good restaurants. Some are high-end, some are casual. The restaurant straight ahead, Two Jacks, is the second oldest restaurant in New Orleans, which dates back to 1856. And coming up on the right is Johnny's Po' Boy restaurant, which has a good breakfast and is famous for the po' boy sandwich, which is basically meat on French bread. And that sandwich was invented in New Orleans in 1929 after a streetcar conductor strike. As a way to feed the strikers, they would go in the restaurant, the owner would yell in the back, "Here comes another poor boy," and so they would put the bottom of the roast beef pot, the gravy and the drippings on, and the scrapings on day-old French bread. So roast beef and gravy po' boys are still popular now. On my left is the New Orleans School of Cooking, a great place to learn New Orleans cuisine. Take the class, eat the food at the end. It includes all your beverages, including a Vita beer, and they usually make fresh pralines. In the front window, our local Southern candy is made of pecans and sugar and sweet milk. Really good, it's really sweet. Try it for free and see if you like it first. And on the corner on the right is Napoleon House, which had been a grocery store opened by an Italian family in a building that originally was the home of the mayor, Nicolas Girard, who concocted a rescue mission to get the Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, out of exile, and they found out he had died 3 days before they went to get him. So it is a good restaurant today. And on my left is Pierre Masparo's restaurant, originally Masparo's Exchange. That was a slave exchange and auction house. They said Andrew Jackson and the Pirates won the Battle of New Orleans. And the office upstairs. And on the right, if you look at the end of the road, there's the cathedral. And the cathedral was built at Jackson Square in 1794. It's beautiful on the inside. It's worth taking a look. And it's on the site of two earlier churches. The first church there blew down in a hurricane in 1723. The second one burnt down in a big fire on Good Friday, 1788. That fire destroyed most of the city, 856 out of 1,100 buildings. Everybody that died was buried where we're going, where we have our cemetery. St. Louis Cemetery number 1 is our oldest cemetery in New Orleans, and it began outside of the town as a mass grave site. On my left, you can see the Supreme Court building of Louisiana, which was built here in 1890 to be the state courthouse, and it cost $1 million when they built it, so they ran out of money. They made the bottom floors marble, the top is terracotta, that was cheaper. It was the state courthouse until the 50s, the Wildlife and Fisheries Museum in the 70s. Hollywood had it in the 80s. They filmed JFK, Pelican Brief, and the Runaway Jury movies there. In 2004, they made the Supreme Court building of our state. We are one of the few states in the nation to have our Supreme Court outside of its capital city. Maine and California are the other two. And this street we're crossing is Royal Street. It's our main shopping area with art galleries, antique shops, and retail boutiques. It's closed to traffic so you can walk and shop and listen to music. And once a month we have a commercial scavenger hunt. You can dress up as the theme, and there's a bunch of smart. This speed bump is a terrorism prevention device that has a panel that comes up to block cars from going on to Bourbon Street. And coming up on the right is Antoine's Restaurant, the oldest restaurant in New Orleans, dates back to 1840. It's a high-end restaurant with a dress code famous for oysters Rockefeller. But this so rich that they made it, they named it for the richest man in America. And they have a good lunch special. It's the menu in the window. They price it by the year, $23 a person. You get a choice of appetizer, entree, and dessert. And our next street is Bourbon Street, which used to be the end of the colony with the swamps in the back. When they settled everything, it was by the river at Jackson Square. And they would put their nightlife back here after a while. It was just bars with music at first. So everybody could sleep longer at the riverfront. It got high-end over time. You had ballrooms, theaters, the French Opera House, and it went downhill when Storyville, the red light district outside the French Quarter, got shut down in 1917, and a lot of jazz music did not even get to come in and bring everything down. Today we drink in all the bars. Get pretty loud over there. It's gonna get real busy at spring break in America. Coming up on the left is Herman Grima. One of our old merchant homes is now a museum. The Herman Grima house dates back to 1831, but the museum is decorated in the style of the 1850s, which are kind of the boom years here in New Orleans. And in the swampy area, we did have some homes that were built. They usually have crawl spaces to avoid flooding of rainwater, pushing in swamp water. They also have balconies on your taller homes and galleries that come to the curb and have a pole to the ground. They keep the sun of your doors and windows so your house is cooler in the summer, as well as providing an outside room. But a lot of the balconies and galleries have spikes on them for protection. On the corners on the left, what looks like grappling hooks, and on the right, what looks like pitchforks. Those are called trees en garde. It translates into protective prayers, and underneath on the poles below are what's called Romeo and Juliet spikes. For Romeo pictures, we say they were made to prevent the Romeos from climbing up and the Juliets from climbing down. They said if Romeo had climbed up, he would sound like Juliet on his way back down. And a lot of the corner lots were bought up by retailers, so your family business was on the ground floor. The family would live upstairs or in the back, and they have that diagonal entrance. There's equal access to and from each street. And over here, you'll see they have grates at the bottom of the walls, which are covering the crawl spaces, which help the house dry out, but doesn't let people climb underneath. And coming up on the right, you'll see a shotgun house, which were simply row houses that came to the South after the Civil War ended slavery. For immigrants that came to be the new labor force, they were long and narrow, that fit long, there were lots everywhere. Made of wood, generally it was a little cheaper. And they would get their name from the idea that you could shoot a gun from the front door all the way through to the back door without hitting any walls. It's really a breezeway that would keep the home cooler in our hot summer months. And in the French Quarter, a lot of the homeowners were wealthy, so then they would offset the doorways, and then they had more privacy. And we're going to cross this next street, which is Burgundy Street. Bourbon and Burgundy were names from the French royal families. Not liquor, low liquor might seem more appropriate. And coming up, we're about a block from the edge of the French Quarter, but coming up on the left, that's behind your house. They had courtyards and slave quarters. The courtyards are in the back. They're considered the heart of the residence. They got their name from a French word for the heart, which is la cour. And then the slave quarters were outer buildings that are 2 to 3 stories tall. Slaves would live on the top floor. The kitchens were on the ground floor. They kept the kitchens out of the main house in the front, so it was cooler in the front in the summertime. And up here, we're going to get by Rampart Street, which is named for our defensive wall. Our rampart was pentagonal in shape. Each part of the pentagon had a fort. The top would open up to let people out of town towards the north, towards like concentrating. And bear with me, pass under the oak tree. The oak trees are pollinating, and there's lots of flowers on the ground. And so if you didn't have allergies, they're making everybody sneeze. But I have allergies and take allergy medicine, and like it's stopping up my nose. And it's just so bad that it's hard for me to talk sometimes. So just bear with me when we're in the Oak Alley areas. And up here, we're going to get across Rampart Street and go into a different neighborhood called Tremé. It's the oldest black neighborhood in New Orleans that began as a brick-making plantation 4 years after the city was founded. And in Tremé on the right is the 1st District Police Station. And on my left, they have a church that was built by the cemetery for funerals of yellow fever victims called Our Lady of Guadalupe, or St. Jude's Church, as the sign of St. Jude on the side of it, which is part of the Stations of the Cross on Good Friday. And the cemetery used to come from the back side of the church before they had a canal dug through here called the New Basin Canal. The turning basin was over on Canal Street. But they got filled in because they learned mosquitoes were breeding, that bred in all the water everywhere, were carrying diseases like yellow fever, which killed thousands of people every summer, almost 8,000 people in 1853. So to control the mosquito, they filled in all the watering areas, including these canals, and turned them into roads and with wide medium strips that we call neutral ground. So they turned to the train lines So the yellow building across the street was a freight train station. We had a passenger station on Canal Street. And Canal Street was actually named Canal Street because it was going to get the end of the canal, but never got the canal because they learned about the mosquitoes. And instead, it became the second widest street in America. It's about 3 times as wide as a lot of them. It has the streetcar track in the middle, and then we're going to get across the street to go by the cemetery, which used to be closer to us and has been consolidated into a smaller area. And St. Louis Cemetery number 1 is our oldest cemetery. It has above-ground tombs of the French style. We're a French colony. France has hard ground, we have wet ground, but here they'd also bury people into the ground, so they weren't going to disturb the remains of those people. And your tombs were built to be miniature monuments, like little houses of the French Quarter that look like Monopoly houses with pictures, porches, balconies like we'd have there, and they are filled with crypts. And crypts are cavities the size of coffins. When the person died, their body was put in their house for the wake. Somebody would sit with them for about 3 days and make sure they don't wake up from their fever or their coma, whatever made them die. And that's when everybody got to visit. If they're still dead after 3 days, then they were brought to the cathedral for the funeral mass and brought to the cemetery for the burial and to bury you. They put you into the top crypt for a year plus 1 day, and then wait the extra day or superstition for the anniversary of death. And in a year's time, your body cooks into a small mass of bones, and they don't bother the remains until they need the space for someone else. And what they do is they open up the brick of the crypt and put on the wood of the coffin and burn it on the spot because they can't reuse the coffin. So then they push your bones into the back of the tomb. In the back of the crypt, they have a hole, so like a laundry chute, your bones are going to fall down to the bottom of the tomb. Or they have a raised basement area called the caveau, and it's like a basement. It is meant to keep everybody's bones together. They said it's a big jumble, but God knows how to sort you out later on. And if somebody dies and there's no room left in your crypts, then you would rent a crypt from someone else, like your friends that like you would probably give it to you for free for a minute. But the church didn't make walls of crypts, so on the west side of the gate is high and deep because those are full of what's called wall vaults or oven vaults, because you do kind of cook down into a mummified state in the heat of the summer. But they were rented for the year and a day, and it's when they needed that they take out your remains and put you into your family's tomb. And a lot of those crypts on the wall on the left are also paupers burials because it was expensive to have a tomb. The cost is how many crypts you have. One crypt in today's money, which is about the height of our wheel, is about $30,000. Two, which are about the height of the wall, the one speaking over the wall, $50,000 and up. Three, like the one I can point at, is $60,000. Now, hey Carla, it's good to see you. But in the back, they have even bigger tombs, which have 12 to 24 crypts. Those are society tombs. Societies would come about as strangers came to town, like there was some genuine profession, culture, religion. They would keep their own records. They have numbers instead of names. Families have put some names on the bottom of them, and they are some of our famous tombs. I'm going to tell you about them if I can't get on to the. I'm going to try to get over that way so we can see over the higher wall. Otherwise, we go on the back side of the church because we're going to see the little slit that is Marie the Most. Marie the Most. Get up there. The tallest tomb is the Virgin Mary holding the cross. It's the marble tomb. It's the Italian Benevolent Society tomb because Italy has all the marble quarries and the statues. The artisans, the statues, they have more statues than most. On the right of that, the lady kneeling is the Portuguese Society tomb. The white square tomb in the back is the French Society tomb. On the left side of the Virgin Mary, there's a white obelisk. That's the Spanish Society tomb. The dark gray tomb is the second Portuguese Society tomb. But there you can see the top of the pyramid. It's 9 foot tall, and that one's going to be Nicolas Cage's tomb. Built in 2010 for the Hollywood actor. He's kind of pretentious. It's a prestigious place to be buried. And there was an open space that probably had some trees. They used to put a lot of fragrant flowers behind the trees to offset the bad smells of death in the cemetery. And so he built this perfectly shaped pyramid that only has a Latin phrase. It says omnia ab uno, which means all from one. It's Freemason in origin. It's the first saying is all from one from all. The Freemasons would believe that everything would come from one source and go back to it. And if you're in front of the tomb around 9 in the morning facing the river, on the winter solstice, when the cemetery opens, the sun sits on top of the pyramid. And that makes it the all-seeing eye, like you have in your dollar bill. And that's a big symbol in the National Treasure movie. Before it finds the National Treasure. So everything has a lot to do with the movie. Of course, it's ego. But we're going to pull on the back side of the church, which used to be the front side of the cemetery. All the funerals were held here in this chapel, which is still open to the mass. And they had no pews when they built it because they didn't want it to stay too long, kind of like with the contagion of the COVID virus. They thought your body was contagious and maybe you were going to get sick if you stayed too long. So when the funeral mass was over, the family would go out the front door, and then the priest would bring the body out the back for the burial, through the gate to the entrance of the cemetery. And they don't usually have garbage in the way, so hang on, I got an obstacle in front of me. But now the entrance to the cemetery is what was the middle of the cemetery. And 6 tombs to the left of it, right over that white SUV, there's a cream colored tomb that's parallel to the wall, so you can see the top of it over the top of the wall. Most tombs on that side are facing the river. They always had a direction. They used to face the rampart, the church at first, and then the river. But Marie Laveau has a tomb that runs along the side of the wall, and she has 3 crypts, and she is our main interceding priestess. Now, Marie Laveau had been baptized Catholic in the St. Louis Cathedral, and she got married there around the age of 19 to Jacques Paris, and he disappeared after a couple of years. He disappeared after a couple of years, and some people think she magicked him away. Other people think he fell in the river and died because they were a laborer. Laborers fall in the river and die even today. And so she is legally known as the Widow Paris, the Veuve Paris. You can see it right past the second palm tree, right over the white SUV. And when she was alive, people would go to her for help a lot of the time, because she had the grace of God of Catholicism and the knowledge of the earthly spirits of voodoo. And so today, voodoo gets because she was a hairdresser. You didn't really pay attention to the help. And the girls would talk about love, and the guys would talk about business, and she would sell their information to people. And she was really good at what she told those people, so people did go to her a lot of the time. Come on, get your light. Hang it up. But when she died, they would come to the cemetery and go to her tomb and hello, and ask for help too. They would give her a gift and make a wish and mark the sign of the cross. And then in the 60s, her tomb got a physical number 3 in front of her. So from 1 cross became 3 crosses, and a ritual of 3 developed. You only got 1 wish, but you gave a lot of gifts. And so the tomb got real defaced a few years ago, and the archdiocese decided they didn't like it, so they shut down free access to the cemetery. You can only go out on a tour under supervision. And then the tours were shut down during the pandemic, and when they reopened, they only allowed 1 company to do a tour, and it paid almost $1 million. So you can do a tour, you just have to catch them at the today. And we're gonna go around the police station, and then we're going around the park, which is Armstrong Park. Neighbor Louis Armstrong, or Satchmo, our local legend in jazz, created. It has the main square for this Tremaine neighborhood inside, which is known as Congo Square, which is where slaves and free people were allowed to congregate together on Sunday. Everybody had free time, and in New Orleans, free and enslaved could be together, where other cities didn't allow that. And so they would have music and play. They would play music, they would have dances, and they often practice religion together, including voodoo rituals over there. We're going to go by the front of it, which connects, honestly, to the cathedral, where the road called Orleans Avenue, which was our main funeral road, and led up to the back gate of the rampart, which was probably over leading into Congo Square. But first, we're going to make a left here on Rampart Street, and they have a streetcar line in the middle that doesn't have a streetcar anymore. We may never have it again, so never wait for this one by accident. And it's gone because of the Hard Rock Hotel collapse that occurred on Canal and Rampart on the right about, I think it was 5 years ago. I want to say today, but that wasn't right. 5 years ago, they laid wet concrete on the top floors, and they didn't have enough steel supports underneath, so it pancaked in our direction. And they had 2 construction cranes on top, 1 tumbled to, that's what this means! One tumbled. That's all I can do. I guess we move it. Well, I keep meaning to make a sign with a pointer, so like I'm going that way. Anyway, so one of the cranes literally tumbled head over heels towards us in our direction. Javelin, it took out the electrical, and then it javelined itself 20 feet deep into the road, upside down. 3 workers were killed. They got 1 out right away. 2 were left in the rubble to rot for 9 months, and the locals say that we are cursed because of that. The curse of the Hard Rock Hotel is why people were killed at Mardi Gras when they were run over by clones in 2 different parades. It really doesn't happen, and then it did. So, come on, get over there. Get the light. Come on. Come on. We're going to go back into the French Quarter of Washington. You can see Armstrong Park on the left. That was St. Peter Street that we just passed. And we're going to cross over Orleans Avenue. square. Part of it includes the building, which is the Municipal Auditorium, which was built for social events in the 1920s because they had a fancy opera house in the French Quarter that burned down in 1859, so this was the replacement. And was the home of our Philharmonic Orchestra until Hurricane Katrina. It has not been open since Hurricane Katrina came to town. This is Orleans Avenue that starts behind the cathedral on the right. So they were waiting for people to send a check. The check was in the mail.
Right.
But the mayor that we have, that's Greta, wanted to turn it into City Hall, and nobody else wanted to turn it into City Hall. And there's a moratorium on what to do with the building. I guess we'll show the mayor. So there's a moratorium on what to do with the building. So we're going to be right here on St. Anne Street. We are most likely going to hit this pothole manhole thing in the middle of the road, but this is an important street called St. Anne Street that used to be the one. Oh, I don't know what the white car goes. Go ahead, white car! I know what cars can hear me. And you can see the park sign on the left that'll light up at night. But this is the 1000 block of St. Anne. It used to be the 100 block of St. Anne Street. Oh, bummer, man. Well, somebody broke into the window, too. And, you know, they break in your cars looking for, they pretty much just look for guns and money, and then out you go, but now you gotta buy your window. So up here on the right, between the brick house and the gray house, is where Marie Laveau had property. So this says Marie Laveau Apartments on it, but Marie Laveau's mom had bought a parcel of land here in the swampy area, so it's really big, because the city liked you to pay taxes on the undesirable property, and she had a little house right here. Then Marie Laveau inherited and raised her family in, and she would have her, and then she would leave everything to her kids. I had a placard on the wall says Marie Laveau and her kids lived there until 1895. And the gray house replaced the original house in 1905 because it was cheaper to knock down the old building and build new ones. So they have the wooden house on the side of the early house. It's probably collapsed partially. Now we are going to make a left up here on Burgundy Street, and it was a swampy area that had a lot of brick cottages on it. The Thru cottage was a one-story kind of square shape that was big or small, that has a pitched roof facing the street. Inside is a kind of an open floor plan of 4 to 6 rooms in that square shape. And then after slavery was abolished, we had a lot of immigrants, a lot of working class people. They got a lot of wooden homes, so we're going to see a lot of those as we go. And a lot of them are private homes, including this one on the right, which was on the market recently for a year for just under $1 million, $999,999. And a generally one-story, one-unit building is $1 to $3 million, whereas townhomes or multi-unit buildings like double shotgun houses are $2 to $6 million. This was built to be an apartment building in the 70s. I don't know when it became a private home. I do know it's a private home today. They have some condos on the market up here on the left, but the reason we have a lot of condos is because a lot of investors bought the properties here after the World's Fair in 1984 and broke up a lot of the buildings into different units. In the smaller units, but a lot of these are old buildings. The cottages that we have date back from usually like maybe the late 1700s to early 1800s, while your townhomes are 1830s to 1870s, and then the wooden homes like 1800s to early 1900s. But they all are pretty much covered in a modern facade of brick and paint and concrete today, because underneath is a soft brick that slaves made for us on a plantation 4 blocks to the left. Or in the wrong direction. Oh. Go ahead. Go ahead. We're going to get humped up. That's why I look at those. Really good. But you can see it here on the left. See how it's not uniform and it has a lot of cracks from the moisture when they cooked it? It's a soft brick that was stuffed 3 bricks wide between posts made of raw trees. So it's the brick between post construction. It becomes a strong wall as the bricks meld together like adobe. And the wood posts of cypress or oak have a rough hatch mark on them that keeps stucco on longer, because it would break off as the year went by, because your bricks shrink as well. Inside was plaster and horsehair, or deer hair, whatever kind of hair, called mucilage. Outside was plaster and lime. And to get it lime, we have clamshells all over the bottom of the river and the lake. And you can see them in the parking lot on the right. They are better filtered than the dirt, which turns to kind of a soup after it rains. And if you boil these shells that you'll find all over, you get a dingy white powder that you can mix with your plaster to make it stiffer and moisture resistant. If you don't want a white house, you could add a pigment. Like a little iron would be kind of peachy, and a lot of iron is more orange, like the paint job is on the left. And then up here, you can see if you add some copper. Come on. you get kind of a cool yellow. And the cemetery used to be colored, was built pretty much in the same way, and so it was a colorful cemetery in the 1800s. But a lot of copper turns more turquoisey, like the shutters all around us. It's called verdigris, the color that copper changes into after being in the air. And you can see the verdigris color on the drain coming up on the right. The drains are copper. So the gutters, the flashing, and the nails. But because they're copper, people steal them. And so instead of having 3 drains, for the longest time this house only had 1.5. And they finally got the permit to replace the drains that are here on the corner, on the right. And so we're going to make a right. You can see a camelback shotgun house on the left with a second story in the back. And that style of house came about because the city was taxing homeowners on how many stories the houses had. The tax collector could only count what was at the sidewalk. To avoid taxes, they put the second story in the back. They thought it looked like a camel's back. It's the camelback shotgun house. And this cottage, sorry about the pothole, is on the market for $899,000. And the inside looks like an Italian tomb. Essentially, it's like a Grecian Italianate tomb inside with beautiful columns and a sunken pool in the middle of the living room with Sistine Chapel tile mosaic on the floor. And I went to the estate sale just to look inside.
So what you're saying is that you can't judge the book by its copy.
Outside has to be historically accurate, inside has to be as modern as more. Yeah. Lenny Kravitz used to have a cottage with a French Quarter, and outside, I think it still has it looks like hand-drawn signs for a grocery store. I can't forget now. But it's even less impressive looking than the corner one that's there. Looks so sad. The inside, it's very, it's not gaudy, but it's definitely different.
Yeah.
So it's interesting just how different they can look on the inside. But yeah, I kept passing the estate sale on the tour, and I was like, I gotta go look at this. I don't even need to buy anything. I just want to go look at the building. And we're gonna make a left at the next corner. We're passing up a grocery. This is gonna pass it. There's actually a good grocery and deli every 2 blocks in the residential side of the French Quarter, which is downriver of the cathedral. Because we're in the Italian district of the French Quarter, when slavery was abolished, the French Quarter had a lot of young Sicilians. And the men worked on the riverfront, the boats, the docks, and the warehouses, and the families would come over. With groceries, bars, restaurants, bakeries, and the mafia. They said the mafia would start in New Orleans as a gang of ruffians called the Black Hand Gang, and they would mark your building with a black hand print. We're going to go up here to Bourbon Street, which has a popular bar on the right side by the stop sign, which is called Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop Bar, which is supposedly the oldest bar in America. It is one of the oldest buildings in New Orleans. It dates back to 1772. It's real dark on the inside. They light it with gas and candles. They have electricity at the bar. They said it belonged to Jean Lafitte the pirate. It was a front for his smuggling operation. He would smuggle goods and slaves into America when that was not legal to do so. And they said he was so rich that he actually lived in the house on the left to watch his bar. It's now a hotel called Lafitte's Guest House. And it has a bar inside. If this one's crowded on the right, run to this one on the left. Because it's owned by the same people. A lot of people don't know it. You can avoid waiting in line sometimes. And then you would have, you can sit at either location, and then you would have access to their bathroom, which is a lot nicer than the bar on the right. But it could be fun people watching on the right. We're going to be making a left on the Bourbon Street, which is going to be through the quieter residential part back here, because the colony really started at Jackson Square and the river. We were settled in a curve of the river that was easily defendable. As I grow, it was already settled by Native American tribes, the Choctaw and the Cherokee. Everything would come into port here. Global goods came upriver on sailing vessels. American trade came on flatboats down the river. Everybody would live by the river. It became, it's because Bourbon Street was a swamp. So then they had the market by the river where everything was sold. It became the French market, and the French became part of town. And the early colony shape was literally 4 blocks by 4 blocks, and they would outgrow that small space real fast and call the first area the Rue Carré. It means old square in French, but this was the swampy area until about 1900, when pump technology improved. And so this downriver side has always been more residential with a lot of young Sicilians calling it Little Italy, a Little Palermo. And so I'm gonna pull over and let the cars go by. Can I pull over? Or not? Sometimes she pulls over by herself. When it gets warm and then starts slowing down, just let them, I just let them pick the forward. Like, just let them do what they want. Because they don't misbehave. They pretty much are. Now, when it's cold and she's full of vim and vigor, oh, she is so bad. He's like, why are we stopping? Let's go.
How long have y'all worked together?
I've been driving there probably about a little over a year. And so she was, her first driver taught her to bite people, taught her to only do one route. She would rear up to go left, like a way she did not want to go. She wouldn't stop at the curb. I couldn't let people off safely anywhere. She would move, she would leave. She did rear up a whole lot. Yeah, so I have seen so many people drive and they're like, we've had to get up and ask police to let us go by because we're like, I'm sorry, she won't turn. So, but what I did, I have a horse and I was taught by the old cowgirls to, if she's bad, just like run her in circles basically. So I do it, it's just a block. So she learned that if she misbehaves in a certain way, we're going around the block. And it's just easier to go where I want you to go. So sometimes she'll pause. She'll think about it. Like she's like, oh, no, I don't want to go.
So I want to show out?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So this street here is Governor Nichols Street, and it was an early colonial road that was a merchant road that started out as a Native American road, as many did, because when they settled the colony by the river, the Native Americans had a route to the Gulf of Mexico using like Ponza train on the route that was high ground in the swampy area called the Esplanade Ridge is what we call it. And so it became an early road between two ports. They started with a river port, and then they put a port at Lake Pontchartrain and Bayou St. John, which is now in City Park. And that was always Bayou Road for a long time, and now it's Governor Nichols Street in the French Quarter. But it got full of merchant traffic, it got full of wagon traffic, and there's actually an old stable on it that are $1 million condos, of course. But when it got full of traffic, they made a bigger road at the edge of town, which is now a border of the French Quarter, which is where we're going. It's about 3 times as wide. It was a lucrative address, too, for merchant plantation owners and ship captains because they could walk or ride to either port to see when boats filled with goods were coming into town. And the wide streets like we're going to, which is Esplanade Avenue, which is named for that tree ridge, has big old trees that are oak trees, unfortunately. I mean, I like them in the summer, I just don't like them right now. But the oak trees are live oak trees that have a big root system and a big branch system, and they're pretty solid trees. And they have a rough bark. There is no windbreak between the river and the lake on this street, so a lot of the shallow rooted trees literally got knocked over, and they finally stopped planting them, which were water oaks, which have a smoother bark, and they used to have a lot of willows and magnolias up here. They do have some sycamores up here, and they obviously have a good root system, but they're brittle, so they're like lopped off on the top. You'll see. And we're gonna make a right up here on Esplanade Avenue because we're making our way to the neighborhood up ahead, which is the Marigny neighborhood, which is part of a plantation last owned by Bernard de Marigny. He was an addicted gambler to the game of craps, which he brought to Louisiana, and he would sell his family's lands to women, immigrants, people of color on the city side first, before slavery was abolished, because he figured out, I guess, that real estate was more lucrative than farming. And that mansion across the street on the left has been made into apartments, but it was on the market last summer for $5 million. Get up there, come on. And when I was a kid, it was a boarding house because they had a lot of hippies in the French Quarter in the 60s and 70s playing music and doing art, including my parents. And they said Jimmy Buffett started playing music in the French Quarter when he was young. I don't know if he found he went first or not. Jimmy Buffett was playing music in the French Quarter. A lot of people left town in the summer, but and we're going to be coming back to Royal Street to see the Gauche Mansion on the right, and a lot of merchants and plantation owners would have property here by the river because the port is where a lot of buyers would come into town. And parties at night were how business deals were cut. So you can see how impressive the Gauche Mansion is from this view, because the merchants would build homes that were kind of good to look at because they wanted the buyer to go to their house and not the neighbor's house, because then they were guaranteed to get the good deal. We had a big freeze Christmas Eve, and so then it got warm and rainy and warm and rainy and warm and rainy, so it looks like everything's in spring now. Those are, I call them loquats or Japanese plums, and they are edible, but a lot of them are eating the rats like them too. And we're going to make a left in the corner, which is Charter Street. So when we get to the corner, if you look to the right, you're going to see the cathedral. And one of the oldest properties in the area is actually the yellow house in the corner with the verdigris double gallery. It's called the Denis House, dates back to 1831. And you can see these houses are real narrow. Well, there wasn't a lot of land available at the time. And then it became much more available after slavery was abolished and they sold off the plantations upriver and downriver. So the house across the street was built in 1872, and it's a lot wider. It's about 3 times as wide because it was a lot easier to get land. And that house at some point was owned by Nicholas Cage when he was married to Lisa Marie Presley, and of course the marriage didn't last long. So neither did the home ownership. But on the corners, on the left and the right, in the middle of this road, you can see the signs about the slave trade of New Orleans, because we were the biggest slave market in the country. And a lot of slaves that were sold here were actually bought off of farms on the East Coast. They walked to New Orleans in the fall, or sold at markets, wherever people were at. So a lot of southern cities would have one main market, but we had them all over. The boat docks, the boats, the French market, Jackson Square, the hotels, and a lot of the mansion rooms. And overnight they were kept in fortified compounds. They had one here on the corner on the left, and it was written about by a slave who had been born free up north and trained as an architect and got kidnapped and sold into slavery in the South. And he wrote about his experiences as a slave, as the memoirs that became the book, 12 Years a Slave, and then the movie was just filmed in the French Quarter and over by a plantation upriver, called Laura Plantation. And we're going to kind of veer to the right now because the French Quarter streets are grid-like. They were laid out by a military architect named Adrian Fogger. Every other street kind of follows the river, or it leads straight to, which are more commercial or industrial, like the next road we're going to, which is Frenchman Street, which is where the locals like to go for their nightlife. There's bars, music clubs, restaurants, and the art markets that only open up at night. At Frenchman Street's only a 3-block area. The music clubs can only be where they have the industrial zoning, otherwise it becomes residential further to the west, and it's a lot quieter back there. And I grew up on Frenchman Street by a park we're going to go see until we moved to Hawaii, and then my mom sold the house in the 80s, and it's become a bed and breakfast owned by my friend Bill, who owns the Spotted Cats, and it's over about the path. And we're going to make a left here so we can see everything. But in the 60s, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, it was pretty vacant when I was a kid, because a lot of people had gone to war and then they moved to the suburbs, and so there wasn't much around. And there's this one nightclub on the right that would open up at 6 called the Dream Palace. And the Dream Palace could play loud music. There was nobody here to stop them. Nobody here to tell them to turn it down. It was very vacant. So the hippies would go there and have a good time. So more music clubs opened up for all the other hippies who wanted to have a good time too. And there is a lot of good music. There's a grocery store where you can go buy a sandwich. You can go to a cafe and grill. They'll have open mic night on Monday. The two corners are down here too, like Electric Ladyland on the left. They're not legal in the French Quarter. My guess is that the sailors slaved the tattoos for any diseases they caught. And then on my right, they have the art market that opens up at night. They have a courtyard on the right for music for art. From DBA on the left, which usually has brass bands and rock bands, and then Spotted Cat on the right. Up and it has grooves and swing from the afternoon till night. They all have a calendar of events in the window, and sometimes flyers you can see who's playing, like at the restaurant Snug Harbor on the left, which was here as a restaurant when I was a kid. It has a nightclub now in the back with jazz musicians. You can see all the flyers in the window. There's a cafe with coffee and liquor on the left, and then a restaurant on the corner. We're going to make a left here at this corner, and you can see on the right Washington Square, which was the main square for the Marigny neighborhood. Every neighborhood has a main square. Washington Square was a football field for a school. Around the corner when I was a kid became a park in the 70s, so the trees are as old as I am, and the playground equipment was donated after Hurricane Katrina. And I grew up about a half a block away from this corner. In the middle of the block is the yellow house that is the bed and breakfast. But this corner house on the right was an orphanage when I was a kid until about 10 years ago. It was last used as Boys Town, which is more of a commercial chain of orphanages. And now it's a hotel called the Royal Frenchman with a nice courtyard and the slave quarters in the back. But these have a third story. They're called garçonniers, in French, boyes garçons. So garçonnier, because the young men were allowed to go out and have some free time before they got married. And usually their spouses were chosen for them at birth. So they would go out and have fun living in the back away from the main house so they would wake everybody up in the front. And if they were wealthy enough, they could have a mistress, and they would have to buy her a house and slaves and a carriage. And if they had children, he claimed the children with a surname, a dowry, and an education. But when he got married, he was supposed to get rid of the mistress. And he didn't always do that. So in the South, we have these shutters that are louvered that you peek through, and they're called jalousies, which is French for jealousy. As the wives would peek through them, looking for the husbands who were late for work, because they were jealous. So jalousies or jealousy shutters today. And traditionally, they did shutter your house to the front because the road smelled so bad, mud, animal waste, and garbage. And you would open up the house to the back in the courtyard that had fragrant flowers, vines, and trees in the back. But today, a lot of people keep them shuttered. It's extra security. Sometimes there's a brick wall behind the shutters because inside can be as modern as you want, but outside has to be historically accurate. Some people just keep them shut because it's extra darkness, which is coolness, which is more insulation. And so if anybody walks in CIS New Orleans, the bar coming up on the right is the bar that they had used as Price Bar in the show, but only on the outside. Inside is in a studio. You didn't watch the show. It's a popular local bar called the R Bar that has good custom drinks, including the pineapple mojito and agave garden. It's very dog friendly, so there's a lot of dogs right over there. And we are going to go up here into the French Quarter on Royal Street, which became our Merchant Row, because Bourbon Street on the right was the end of town, and the land by the river on the left was given to church and government officials. This was kind of the real estate corridor that was left for merchants to buy and build homes, and they often built tall homes that by Jackson Square crammed together. They share firewalls, so if one house catches fire, the other will not. But it became our social promenade because those big homes had big balconies that shaded them and shade the passers-by underneath from the sun and the rain. And so this would become our social promenade. And ladies could walk from one end of town to the next, showing off their new hairdo and new clothing with their friends, protected from the sun and the rain. And eventually stores would open up to cater to them. And there's still a lot of shopping on Royal Street today, though it's mostly over by Canal Street, the old business in the town. And you're going to have a good view of the Gauche Mansion coming up. It's about 1/3 of the block. Plantation owner city homes are just small versions of their plantations in the country. The big house is surrounded by small buildings and courtyards that were utility buildings for the animals from the slaughter from the slop. Behind the main house is a big courtyard with a slave quarter in the back and a carriage house or stable on the side.